monsters coming down the hall. Spires cover all the walls. Serial killer is on the line. Wants to know if you have the time. Aliens are landing soon. This will mean certain doom. A jigsaw sputters and comes alive. Blood and death are close behind. One thing you can be certain of, the zombies just can't get enough. Just one more bite is all they want. The ghosts downstairs are on the hunt. The Shade Chronicles are keeping score. That's what all the writing's for. They record the stories one by one so you don't miss all the fun.
Welcome to the Shade Chronicles, an anthology-style podcast featuring short works of fiction and serial prose, specifically with a sci-fi and horror flavor. Your hosts for the podcast are Derek Leffridge and Lawrence Trokey.
Hi, this is Derek Leffridge.
Hi, this is Lawrence Trokey, and thank you for spending your time with us. Let's get started with our first story.
The Shade Chronicles are keeping score. That's what all the writing's for. They record the stories one by one so you don't miss all the fun.
Paper Doll by Lawrence Trokey, Part 2. Cassio casually scanned the coffee shop until her gaze fell on Sammy. They stared at each other for several seconds, Sammy's mouth hanging open and slightly askew, as if he was having a stroke. Then she walked straight to his table, pulled out the chair opposite his, and sat down. "Hello," she said in an even tone. Hi?" Sammy stuttered. She looked exactly as he had described her in the journal. There was no detail missed. He could not believe what he was seeing, what was happening right now. The girl of his dreams sitting across the table from him, and apparently here because he wrote about her in his writing journal. What the fuck, Sammy wondered. After a moment of awkward staring, Sammy remembered his manners. "Would you like something to drink?" She thought about it for a moment. "I'm not sure what to get. What do you have?" "It's a cappuccino. You want to try it?" He offered his cup to her. She took it and removed the plastic lid. She sipped from the cup and immediately handed it back. "It tastes like sweetness mixed with something dirty." She made a face that showed her disapproval of the beverage. How about a lemonade?" he suggested. "What's that?" She seemed to be genuinely uncertain. "Just wait here." He got up from the table and went to the counter. A few minutes later, he returned with a cup of lemonade. "Here," he offered her the cup. She took it and sipped again. This time, she smiled in response to the flavor of the lemonade. "It's good. I like it." He watched her drink the rest of the lemonade and was speechless. When she finished the drink, she said, "What's next?" He didn't have an answer for her. He wanted to say they would begin spending the rest of their lives together, but he thought it sounded too impetuous. He decided to start small. "Where do you live?" She looked puzzled at the question. "I live here, right now in this place." "No, I mean, where is your place? Your house or apartment," he explained. "I don't have one," she said. "Should I?" "Where do you sleep?" He didn't know why this was as hard as it was. Surely she came from somewhere. "What's sleep?" Again, she did not seem to know what he was talking about. Sammy was stunned. How could she not know what sleeping was? The most basic human activity outside of eating and taking a poop, and she claimed not to understand what it meant. He wondered if she knew about the other two as well. Then a thought struck him like a lightning bolt. The answer came to him as clear as day, and it nearly knocked him off his chair. What if she was not real? Maybe not even human. What if she only existed because Sammy wrote about her in his journal? What if Sammy had created her? If this was true, it would explain a lot of things. How she didn't seem to know anything about anything. How she looked and acted down to the last dotted I and crossed T, the way Sammy wrote about her in his journal, and so on. If true, Sammy needed to get her home before someone found out about this, and the shit really hit the fan. "Look, I think it would be best if we would go back to my place. Sammy said and then blushed. He definitely didn't mean it the way it sounded. He was just trying to get ahead of the situation, and going back to his apartment meant they would be safe from prying eyes and ears. They could sort it all out there and come up with a plan. Okay, was all she said. No protest or wariness about going to a stranger's home she just met. He guided her out of the coffee shop and led her down the street to the entrance of his apartment building. He quickly ushered her past the doorman and gave him a slightly embarrassed nod. She was fascinated by the elevator and giggled at the feeling of it rising up the floors to Sammy's level. Outside the apartment door, Sammy fumbled for his keys. He heard the door to the apartment of his perpetually nosy neighbor across the hall open and managed to unlock the door in time for him to quickly sweep Cecile into the apartment before the old woman could see them. Safely inside his apartment, Sammy breathed a sigh of relief and started to relax. He led Cecile to the couch and sat down facing her, now to figure out what was going on. Sammy stared at Cecile for a moment, and she stared back, smiling. God, she was beautiful, he thought. Let me start with a few questions, if that's okay, he asked. Okay, she replied, still smiling at him. What's your name? He wanted to be sure of his suspicions about her and the journal. Cecile, she smiled in response. There it was, the name he wrote in the journal for his perfect woman. Maybe I just got lucky and guessed her name, he thought. But he knew it was a long shot that he would just come up with the name and happen to be right. He had to press her for more details to be sure. What can you tell me about yourself? He thought he'd try an open-ended question instead of continuing the guessing game. She giggled at him like he said something silly. It was the cutest thing he thought he ever saw another human being do. She reached out and took his hand and said, You know everything about me already. Sammy gulped hard. Was it the journal? Did it possess some strange magical power that brought Cecile to life after he wrote about her in its pages? How the hell was that even possible? Where did his aunt get the thing anyway? The questions kept racing through his mind and he was speechless. He didn't know what to say or do next. Then Cecile leaned in and gave him a kiss. It was the most amazing thing that has ever happened to him in his whole life, he thought. She whispered to him, I am here because of you. I am here for you. She kissed him again. Sammy's questions and concerns melted away after that. The next 2 months were a blur for Sammy. There were a couple of logistics that they had to sort out and solve, like getting Cecile a wardrobe and typical personal and hygienic items. After all, even though Sammy had created her, apparently she still needed such things. Sammy was uncertain about taking Cecile out in public too much, so he did all the shopping. It was a little awkward for him buying tampons and women's underwear, but he powered through it nonetheless. There was also the part about teaching Cecile how to be a human being, which hadn't occurred to Sammy. He realized it when she was in discomfort that evening, saying her lower parts were hurting. It took Sammy a second, but then he deduced that she needed to pee. He took her to the bathroom, and after a few awkward moments, they worked it out. After Cecile fell asleep, Sammy pulled out the journal and read through what he had written. He wondered if he could fill in the blanks of some of this stuff by writing it out in the book. He spent the next 2 hours explaining every human activity he could think of, hoping this would educate Cecile and make things easier for them both. He fell asleep on the couch with the journal across his lap. Even with the awkward moments and all the explaining, Sammy was having the time of his life. Cecile was amazing in every way. She was so much fun to be around. She was always happy to be with him, it seemed, and they got along so well together. Even in moments when Sammy was frustrated with something, it never appeared to bother Cecile. She just smiled at him or gave him a hug, and it cured Sammy of whatever was ailing him at the time. Their physical relationship was incredible. Sammy could not believe that being with a woman could ever be as good as it was with Cecile. Every desire was satisfied with her, and she responded in kind to him. Needless to say, Sammy fell madly in love with Cecile. It was about a week before Jordan was to return home when Sammy thought he needed to prepare Cecile for his return. Jordan and Sammy had talked a couple of times during Jordan's trip abroad, but Sammy never said anything about Cecile to him. He would need to talk to Jordan too before he came home about her, but he wasn't sure how to tell him. He decided against being truthful about where Cecile came from, because he was sure Jordan would think he lost his mind if he told him the truth. He invented a cover story about Cecile being an old girlfriend he knew from his hometown. He ran into her at the coffee shop, and they hit it off again. He knew the part about her moving in with him was going to seem a bit sudden, but he would just have to hope Jordan wasn't going to press him too hard about that. He wrote it all out in a journal and then quizzed Cecile on the details. She had the story down perfectly. He thought he was ready to call Jordan and tell him about Cecile.
"How's it hanging?"
Jordan said as he answered the phone. He sounded like he was at a party. "Long and slightly to the left," Sammy smiled as he responded. He did miss Jordan being around. "Say, do you have a second? I need to talk to you about something."
"Yeah, let me go outside. They're having a party here and it's a bit noisy."
After a second, Jordan said,
"Okay, shoot."
"I met someone while you were gone. She's an old girlfriend of mine from back home. I know this is going to sound crazy, man, but we're in love." Sammy held his breath after revealing the news, waiting for Jordan's response.
"No shit, that's awesome. Congrats, bro."
Sammy smiled again at Jordan's response. "Thanks. There's something else. She moved in with me, too. I know this might seem weird, but we really are in love, man. She doesn't have a job right now, though, so she can't afford to pay rent, but I will cover everything for her. It won't be a permanent situation, I promise. We will figure out something soon so you don't have to deal with the both of us in the apartment for too long." Exactly what they would do, Sammy had no idea, but he hoped Jordan would be okay with his explanation.
"Wow, dude, you must be serious about her. Look, I'm cool with it as long as I don't have to stress over if the toilet seat's up or down. You dig?"
Jordan was taking the news way better than Sammy could hope. "Thanks, buddy. I really appreciate it. I can't wait for you to meet her. You're gonna love her." Sammy happily wrapped up his call with Jordan. A week later, Sammy and Cecile waited for Jordan to come home. They made a "Welcome Back, Jordan" banner and hung it over the entrance to the kitchen, which was visible from the front door. When Jordan entered the apartment, Sammy and Cecile cheered and shot streamer poppers at him. Jordan found this hilarious and laughed at the welcome. He dropped his bag and gave Sammy a big bear hug. Then they turned their attention to Cecile. She stood there wearing a big smile and holding her hands, anxious to be introduced to Jordan. "Jordan, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Cecile." Sammy waved his hand out towards her like he was presenting a brand new car to a contestant on a game show. "I am so pleased to meet you," Jordan said, extending his hand towards Cecile. She stepped in past it and put her hands on both sides of his face. Then she kissed him. Sammy was stunned at this. Did he not explain to Cecile what a handshake was? Jordan was stunned too, but was smiling when he stepped back. He glanced at Sammy and slapped his arm in a friendly way. "I can see now why you fell for this little lady. She's awesome." Sammy tried to compose himself and move on. However, he was just going through the motions at this point. Something else was consuming his thoughts. They helped Jordan put his bags away and sat down at the table for a meal Sammy had made for the occasion. It was lasagna, Jordan's favorite. While they ate and drank, Sammy noticed Cecile never took her eyes off of Jordan, and she was smiling at him the whole time. He hoped she would look his way for a reassuring glance, but none was offered. After dinner, Jordan excused himself to his room, claiming jet lag was kicking his ass. Sammy and Cecile stayed in the kitchen to clean up. When he felt Jordan was out of earshot, he turned to Cecile and said, "What the hell was that?" Cecile was washing a dish in the sink. She turned to Sammy and replied, "What do you mean?" Frustrated, Sammy said, "I mean, why did you kiss him? And why didn't you look at me all night? You barely even noticed I was in the room." "I was doing what you told me to do. I was making Jordan feel like he was welcomed home." Her phrasing was a bit off, but Sammy knew what she meant. "That's not what I meant," he shot back at her, his voice starting to rise with his temper. She stopped cleaning dishes and turned to him and tried to embrace him. Sammy held up his hands and stepped out of the kitchen. Cecile was unsure what to do next, so she stayed at the sink looking at Sammy. Sammy reached for his coat on a hanger mounted near the front door. "I need some air. I'll be back." He reached for the door and exited the apartment. Cecile stood at the kitchen sink for several minutes waiting for him to return. She wondered why he didn't just use the air they already had in the apartment. Things calmed down between Sammy and Cecile, and the next few weeks were fairly normal, with the exception of Jordan being in the apartment. Due to his trip abroad, Jordan was promoted to an associate level with his firm, which they celebrated by going out for the evening. All the while, Sammy would secretly watch the interactions between Jordan and Cecile. He noted several times when their glances lingered a bit too long on each other. He also witnessed the moments when they physically came in contact with each other, and the manner of the contact: a touch on the arm, a bumping of shoulders on the elevator, a pat on the back. All of this was feeding something inside of Sammy. If pressed, he would have denied he was jealous of the two, but it was exactly that and something much more, deeper and darker. He went by a department store one afternoon while picking up some things for the apartment, as he typically did. He left Cecile at home and Jordan was at work. He bought a nanny cam and brought it back with the groceries. While Cecile put away the groceries, he slipped into the bathroom with it to open and then discard the packaging. He hid it in his pocket when he left the bathroom. That night, after Jordan and Cecile went to bed, he took the nanny cam and placed it on a built-in shelf in the living room. It was quite small and would be hard to notice unless you were looking for it. He positioned it to have the widest field of view of the rest of the apartment. Checking it from his phone, he saw that the camera could see most of the living room, some of the kitchen, and the hallway to the bedrooms and bathroom. Satisfied with its installation, he went back to bed. A few more weeks passed, and Sammy was now obsessed with reviewing the footage from the nanny cam. He slipped into the bathroom, or would wait until Cecile was asleep and then go into the living room to watch the video playback. Each viewing revealed more and more instances of Jordan and Cecile interacting with each other in ways that drove Sammy mad. Little flirtations from Jordan, smiles and giggles from Cecile at Jordan's stupid jokes, casual touching when they sat near each other on the couch watching TV. Each of these and more made Sammy think there was something between Jordan and Cecile. The next week, Jordan had to travel for business, which left Sammy and Cecile in the apartment alone. He decided to confront her about his suspicions. "I want to talk to you about Jordan," he stated with no preamble to his comments. "Sure," Cecile replied and sat down on the couch with him. "How do you feel about me?" he said, seemingly off subject. She smiled at him, reached out to touch his hand, and said, "You know how I feel about you." He slowly pulled away his hand from her and asked, "What about Jordan?" "What about Jordan?" she repeated after him. "How do you feel about him?" He clarified what he meant. "He is our friend. I feel I like him like you like him." It was an awkward answer, Sammy thought. "Yes, I like him because he's my friend, but you barely know him. How do you really feel about him?" Sammy pressed her on it. For the first time, Cecile did not look happy. She looked confused and didn't know how to respond to Sammy's question. Finally, she asked, "Are you unhappy?" He was surprised by her question. He thought for a minute about how to respond and said, "I am concerned that you have feelings for Jordan like you have for me. I want to know if that's true." "Did I do something wrong?" was her only response. Sammy wasn't sure if she was trying to hide her feelings about Jordan or if she truly did not know what Sammy was asking. They spent the rest of the weekend quietly doing chores around the apartment. Sammy pretended he had a lot of work to do for the paper and spent a great deal of time at his desk. He was really trying to figure out what to do. He knew for certain there was something between Jordan and Cecile, which meant what he had or wanted to have with Cecile was in jeopardy. Even if Cecile didn't realize what was happening with her and Jordan, Sammy could see it developing, and it was only a matter of time before it outpaced his own relationship with her. The thought of losing Cecile tore Sammy's guts to shreds. He felt like dying. He also thought about what it would mean if Cecile really did leave him for Jordan. Jordan would soon discover how Cecile came to be there, and that meant a lot of awkward things for Sammy. How the hell could he explain it to Jordan, or anyone else, if the truth got out about Cecile? At that moment, he felt an urge to get the journal and open it. Cecile had retired for the night, so he reached into his backpack and pulled it out. He rubbed his hand over the cover, and it made him feel better for some reason. Then an urge to write in it came over him. He quickly rummaged through his backpack for the pen he used to do all the writing in his journal. Once he found it and uncapped it, his hand poised over a fresh page waiting for inspiration. Then it hit him, and he wrote in the journal till dawn. It was Sunday morning when Cecile found Sammy asleep on the couch in the living room. The journal was closed on his lap as he lay on the couch. When she reached down to move it, a wave of electricity swept across her body. She instantly removed her hand from it, stood up, and went into the bedroom. Then she dressed to go out and walked out of the apartment while Sammy was still asleep on the couch. She walked down the street for some time, passing by other people walking to and fro. Even on a Sunday morning, the Lower East Side of Manhattan was quite busy. She was headed towards a subway station, but she passed at least 2 of them before entering the next one. She walked down the stairs and approached the turnstile. She waited for the person in front of her to go through, and then she leapt over the turnstile effortlessly. That got her a few looks from people waiting on the platform. It also got the attention of a transit cop at the other end of the platform. He started to approach her as she walked up to the edge of the subway boarding platform. Just as he was a few steps away from her, Cecile jumped off the platform and was struck by a passing train. Many people screamed in shock at the sight of Cecile jumping to her death. The transit cop quickly called in the situation, and within a few minutes, police and other emergency responders were at the platform, escorting people away from the scene, interviewing witnesses, and performing the gruesome task of dealing with the remains. After a week or more, the investigation would not reveal much about the apparent suicide. The police were able to pick up Cecile on traffic cameras around the area, but did not know where she came from exactly. The local TV news would broadcast a grainy, blown-up image of Cecile walking to the subway station in hopes of getting someone to identify her, but no one did. Cecile did not have any ID or other ways to identify her. Her fingerprints did not match anyone in the database. The police interviewed people in the area, and even though some thought they had seen her before, most could not provide enough information to help them figure out who she was and where she came from. Eventually, they called her a Jane Doe suicide and moved on to the next tragedy. When Jordan came back from his trip after a couple of weeks, Sammy told him the news. He said that he and Cecile had a fight, a big one, and that they broke up. She packed up and went back home, stating she never wanted to see him again. That night, Sammy and Jordan went to their favorite pub, trying to soothe Sammy's broken heart with beer. The next day, Sammy took the journal from the apartment. He walked down to the East River Promenade, which allowed him to walk along the river's edge. Several people were out in the park riding bicycles, walking dogs, and jogging. He stopped at the handrail and looked out over the river. He thought about the events of the past few weeks or so, and, in particular, about what he had written in the journal the night before Cecile died. He knew it was over with Cecile. Things were starting to slip out of control for him as well, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. He needed to cover his tracks and move on from Cecile. He decided to write an ending to her story, one that would be obscure enough that the authorities would not know who she was or where she came from. There was no other way around it. It meant lying to Jordan too, but that would not be so hard to do either, he knew. For a moment, Sammy wondered if anyone would consider him a murderer for the way he made Cecile go away. To be a murderer, don't you have to actually have murdered someone? A real person? Was Cecile even a real person? He reflected on these thoughts as he stared at the river. Then he started to get angry. Angry at Jordan for screwing everything up with Cecile. They were doing fine until he came back from Europe. Cecile had been attentive to all of his needs and desires, when it was just the two of them. It was really Jordan's fault that Cecile was gone now, if you think about it, Sammy reasoned. He was why Cecile had to go, because he couldn't trust Jordan to be around her. Yes, Jordan was to blame for everything. For the first time, Sammy had hard feelings about his only friend. He felt their relationship was coming to an end, and he was fine with that. There was really no way back from this, Sammy concluded. How could he spend time with Jordan, knowing he was the reason Sammy lost the love of his life? He had come to the river to dispose of the journal, to get rid of the evidence of Cecile and how she died. He reached into the book bag and pulled it out. He stroked the cover, and it felt good to him, which calmed him down. He walked over to a nearby park bench and sat down with the journal on his lap. He stared at it for several minutes, losing track of time. Suddenly, the familiar feeling came over him to write something in the journal. He went through his backpack to find his pen. He opened the journal and began writing at a feverish pace. He sat there writing in the journal till sundown.
Attention Shade Chronicle podcast listeners. The merchandise store is now open. You can find the merchandise store on the merchandise tab on the Shade Chronicles website, which is at theshadechronicles.com. Find premium t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, travel mugs, ball caps, and more at the Shade Chronicles podcast merchandise store. We now resume your regular programming.
Brothers Time, Part 2, Creation. Boone was born in the third room on the left of the second floor of the River's Rim Saloon. His mother was a dancer at the saloon, and his father was in town for the week, working in a local mine. Myrta, Boone's mother, received an offer when he was 4 years old that did not involve Boone, so she left without 4-year-old Boone. Without a mother, but with a growing town raising him, Boone had a simple, sometimes unstable, but good enough childhood for the time and situation he was left in to survive. When Boone turned 15, he got a job as a ranch hand for the Tanner family just outside of town of River's Rim, by the southern edge of the Moon Slide mountain range. Jack Tanner, the owner of the ranch, liked the hard work Boone did for his farm, often at times to Boone in private, compared Boone to his lazy, spoiled children who did not have a farm life desire. For over 2 years, Boone had a great life that he could never see ending, but it did. Not his life, but the life of ranch owner Jack Tanner ended, and weeks after his death, the family got together, comforted everyone, cried, and told stories, but then it was time to get back to work. While Boone is making his way from the bunkhouse and into the field to work on one day, he hears the familiar sound of someone riding up to him on a horse, and he stops and turns to see who it is. Jack Jr., Jack Sr.'s oldest son, is riding up to Boone. Jack Jr. slows his horse and stops, and without getting off the horse, looks down at Boone and says, "This farm was my dad's dream, not mine. And my brothers and I are selling it today, so you have an hour to get your things out of the bunkhouse and head out of the road. Thank you for all your help." Devastated and heartbroken, Boone makes his way from the ranch, his home, and towards the town of River's Rim again. At age 18, Boone began to work on the railroad and was a great worker. The railroads at the time were a highly tension-filled environment, with many evil and unlawful individuals always coming and going. One afternoon, after everyone got their pay, Boone finishes a repair on part of the track when he is hit from behind and falls to the ground. As Boone tries to get up, others begin to kick and punch him, and during the attack by the others, his pay is stolen. Those beating him run off to the railroad manager's office saying he was the problem person who started the fight, and this causes him to be fired. Beaten up, Boone stumbles back to the town of River's Rim. Then about 9 months after odd jobs but nothing permanent, Boone is sitting in the corner of the bar enjoying drinks from the little money he had earned from jobs around town. Feeling the warm hug of the whiskey, he realizes the big card game that has been going on since he got there has gotten everyone's attention in the saloon. It has come down to two individuals who have almost all the chips between them. One of the players is the owner of the local mine, and the other is the town mayor. To sweeten the pot, the mine owner says they should each choose someone in the saloon to be their next new employee for the loser. The mayor accepts, looks around, then smiling, points out Boone, who he calls the town bad luck for the next foreman. The mine owner takes a long drag on his cigar and looks over and points with his lit cigar to where Clyde, the town drunk who is about passed out, is slumped at a table alone. The dealer gets ready to deal as everyone in the saloon surrounds the table, including Boone, who has stumbled over to the group. Both players stare each other down as the cards are dealt and discards are made. The final hands are called, and confidently, with his cigar hand, the mine owner slaps his cards down with a king high. As everyone slaps knees and comments with 1800 cursing, the mayor slowly puts his fanned out hand on the table, ace high. The crowd erupts. The mine owner slams his hand on the table in frustration from defeat. Then the mine owner puts his cigar in the mayor's whiskey, making the room get silent. The mayor looks at the desecration of his drink and flips over the table and causes the fight to begin. In the destruction, Boone grabs a deck of cards used for playing and runs out of the saloon. Even though a position working in mining is not something Boone wants to do because of the dangers, the pay is more than he has ever received, and he feels honored to have had the position even though it was due to dumb luck. Over the next few weeks, Boone's great work ethic and motivation impresses everyone at the mine, and this he believes is finally going to be turnaround to his unlucky life. One day, a couple of new workers, under Boone's supervision, do not listen and cause a collapse that kills 3 workers of their crew. The workers, to protect themselves, influence the owner of the mine and everyone in town that Boone is to blame for the collapse since he was their foreman. He is at fault for everything that occurred. Boone is taken to jail for trial, but the years of unfortunate circumstances have taken their toll on his mind, and he escapes jail, disappears into the hills, and is not seen again in town as he was. Boone eventually ends up in the mountains. Unfortunately, as the winter season's coldest temperatures hit the area, Boone realizes he needs to get more firewood. He heads into the woods near the mountain line where he lives and makes it 20 feet and sees a light of what looks like a campfire in the distance. As he slowly comes up to the fire, he sees a figure sitting on a large stone close to the fire, and its head is covered in a hood, and its posture looks as if it's looking down at the fire. Trying not to startle the individual, Boone announces his approaching by saying, "Hello? What are you doing out here in this terrible weather? Are you okay? Are you alone?" The shrouded individual answers, "Neither of us are alone." Boone stops and says, "No, I am alone. I've been alone nearly all my life." Boone looks down to the ground as a heavy defeated feeling overcomes him. He begins walking again and continues, "Why are you out here? Are you real, or is this something in my mind?" The figure responds, "I cannot speak for your mind, but I can sense that your soul is torn and burning." The figure looks up at Boone and lowers their hood. Their faces darkened by a large protruding forehead and brow. The eyes are bright, and it is wearing a chainmail type mask only on the lower half of its face over the nose and mouth. The figure takes a deep breath and continues, "I am a Malantroy presence, which has a human form to share a message, but is a midway spirit that has not yet been able to move on to the next dimension." Boone, feeling an odd calmness, walks up to a log on the opposite side of the fire from the figure and sits, then replies, "I wish I could move on to something other than disappointment, pain, and unwantedness." "Well," the figure announces, "I can make that happen, but I need one thing from you." "I don't think I have anything I can give you," Boone replies. "I have nothing, unless you want my soul." Boone grins and makes a laughing snicker sound. The figure does not return the laughter and just looks up at Boone expressionless. Only the crackling of the fire and the faint sound of the winter wind can be heard as they look at one another. Boone breaks the stare off by saying, "That was a joke." Really, was it? The figure asked, looking into the fire and twisting a twig into the white-hot ashes formed on a log, and without flinching, its long, thick, pointed nails begins to bend down at the tip as they seem to melt by the heat of the fire. Boone looks from the figure and back to the fire as it moves its left worn leather boot into the fire's edge and then into the fire. Smoke begins to circle the toe of the boot and begins to make the form of what looks like an owl. Embers from the fire begin to rise from the owl-shaped smoke and begin to rise to the trees above, causing the fire to brighten. Boone tenses up, leans back a bit from the increased heat, and says, "That is an interesting trick." The figure calmly says without looking up, "No tricks. Would you like to make a deal to stop your suffering?" The figure reaches up with its left bony hand and touches its face with long fingers to the chainmail covering and unsnaps it. Boone looks up to the moonlit sky above and announces, "Well, I do not have anything left and can never get a break from this damn world or the people in it. So if I can get something for my soul that makes this life finally worth it, then why not?" Boone looks down at his feet and says in a near mumble, "How does this work?" The figure looks right at Boone and asks, "What is it you have in your inside jacket pocket?" Boone reaches into his coat and puts his hand on the deck of cards wrapped in a purple piece of material and slowly pulls it out and cautiously asks, "Do you mean this?" The figure nods and says, "That must be important to you, and the material it is wrapped in might be even more important, isn't that right?" Boone looks at the card deck in his hand and runs his thumb over it and responds, "Yes, the cards were a symbol of what I thought would be a change to my bad life, and the purple material is all I have to remember my mother." The figure removes the rest of its face covering, lays it on the ground, sits straight up, then stands up, walks into the fire and then out and stands right in front of Boone, smoldering but not on fire or yelling in pain. It then puts its long fingernailed hands onto Boone's shoulders and bends its misshapen head down to look Boone straight in his eyes, and with a distant whisper says, "After tonight you will no longer need sentimental trinkets like that to repair your ripped and torn soul." The figure presses his slick protruding forehead against Boone's, and Boone becomes lightheaded and feels the need to scream. The figure and Boone begin to rise in unison without using their legs and begin to float up into the sky. Boone rears his head back and looks up at the stars in the sky, and his body gets cold, and his scream becomes a roar, and he blacks out from the rage and pain. The deck of cards wrapped in the material falls to the ground a few feet from their fire. For the rest of the winter, Boone spends time resting in his cave during the day and only comes out in the dusk to evening to wander the woods leading into town. While in the woods, he would hunt animals for food, and the only way he knew this was from the many carcasses around him each time he woke up. He had no memory of going out into the woods during the evening. As the spring and summer begins, Boone realizes he has made his way to the surrounding farms and the town of River's Rim. The only way Boone realizes this since his evening amnesia after being with the Malantroy presence is by the live carcasses in his cave and pieces of clothing, hats, and shoes when he wakes up in the morning. Boone's conflict with this effect of the Malantroy presence becomes something he wants to get help with and decides to go into town to get help. As this thought goes through the synapses in his brain, he feels a cold black shadow filling him from the inside. His vision narrows and he quickly exits the entrance to his cave and begins to run into the woods. He runs towards the town of River's Rim, and at top speed with anger and hunger he has never felt before. Dusk has gone to dark, and the few lights in the town are visible by Boone, and he breaks the border of the woods, growls at the top of his lungs, and heads straight for the general store in the middle of town.
To be continued next time on the Shade Chronicles podcast.
All right, those were two good stories. The first one was Paper Doll Part 2. Finally got the second part of that, and I really enjoyed it. I'll let you discuss it a little bit, Lawrence, here in a minute, but it's a cool sci-fi story. The guy is creating his own world to what he wants, and then, unfortunately, like always seems to happen, things don't always go the same or the right way, And if you want to talk a little bit about that's fine. I got a couple other things later on, but go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, so in part two, we finally get to meet the woman that he wrote about in this weird magical journal. And maybe at the beginning of part two, you're still kind of wondering, is it all just a coincidence that he wrote all these things and then suddenly this woman appears and she's exactly like he described? But I think if you followed what I was intending to lay down there, when you get a little further into the story, you start to realize, well, whatever Sammy's writing in this journal is actually manifesting itself in real life.
Right. Let me interrupt you there. That's what I was going to go to next because I like that the twist came whenever it was involving Jordan and Casil
Yeah.
and the kind of relationship there because she doesn't know any better because she's a made up thing.
Right.
And, that kind of thing. Just so that I was sitting there thinking, okay, how's this going to end? So, yeah, you can continue, but I'm just saying that I kind of like that bringing us into that, which is understandable. It would go that direction, but it was really nice to kind of bring it in there.
Yeah, I think it was probably a little bit predictable, but still, hopefully, again, the way I did the storytelling in it made it interesting
Oh,
enough.
yeah.
You knew a love story if it was going to be something that we were writing, and we're interested in the sci-fi and horror side of things. It's gonna have to go wrong, and the best way to make a love story go wrong is for somebody else to come in and steal the love interest, right?
Right.
And yes, you're absolutely right. Cecile, even though she's learning a lot and Sammy is trying to write in as much information into the journal to help educate her and bring her up to speed, there are things that she just can't get. And there's just things that Sammy just cannot explain to the level of detail that would be necessary for someone to understand all the nuances of human behavior and so on. So I tried to make Casil seem still awkward about human interactions.
Right.
That's why, she kisses Jordan when they meet instead of a handshake or a hug kind of thing. And of course,
Yeah,
Sam,
because she only knows one thing, love. She only
yes,
knows one thing because he wrote love. He wanted someone to love him in that type of situation, and she doesn't know that to him or Jordan or a lamp. Not really a
right.
lamp, but I'm just saying that's, I get that.
No, you're absolutely right. And there, Sammy not being an experienced person in the art of love naturally would have jealous tendencies to see that kind of thing. And then he'd start panicking or being paranoid about what's Jordan's intention. And Jordan is kind of this carefree party dude. So maybe he would follow up on some of the things that Casil is doing and think that maybe she's interested in him as well, and so on. So
Right.
Sammy's brain is just going a million miles an hour down this road of jealousy and paranoia. And that's why we end up with the conclusion that we end up with is
Which I like. I want to interrupt you. I like how he had to basically, in my opinion, you didn't really say it straight up, but had to kill off his creation in a sense, meaning Casil.
yeah, yeah,
In my opinion. But what I do like, and we've already heard the whole thing, but what I do like is the ending and how I kind of, in my mind, he's writing feverishly again. Is he going to do something to Jordan?
right.
Continue the story like to make a woman for Jordan that will be his type of thing like that,
Yeah.
a petty kind of thing. It just leaves a lot of open things that are really cool to think about.
Well, and that's an interesting take. I didn't think of it in that direction. That would be a nice alternate to maybe some of the things I was hinting at, or at least what I was thinking was where Sammy was going. I was trying to start to turn Sammy into a monster. He's off the rails. He's already done something horribly wrong,
Got you.
and now the next horrible act is going to be just a little easier because
Right.
it's already down that slippery slope. So I would, if I was Jordan, I'd be a little concerned.
Correct. Yeah.
But anyway, that's kind of the gist of it, and the inspiration, of course, was based on the title. And once I got in there, I just had fun whipping it together. So
It was good. I liked it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So now we have a part two right, of Brothers Time. And in the first part,
Correct.
we ended on this cliffhanger with the brothers being imperiled by some monster
Hmm.
that's lurking around. But then you've also got the, kind of the crazy situation they find themselves in where they're thrown back in time.
Hmm.
And then part two kind of takes us on a tangent to
Hmm.
fill in some backstory.
Right.
And I don't, well, I guess we've already heard the story, so
Hmm.
I can talk about spoilers here. So Boone is what ultimately becomes this monster
Hmm.
that you've created now. And tell me a little bit more about the monster, because
Hmm.
it seems like you've done some research on this guy.
Yeah, it's a thing of I'm kind of looking at it as it creates a physical monster, but there is what I call the Malantroy presence,
Yeah.
which is something that will kind of be a something that'll bring the monster to life in the sense of communicating with the human being, not necessarily the monster communicating and being its conduit to the world and things like that, even though the monster and it are one and the same, but it's kind of like a shadow, but a little bit more than a shadow of it. And that's what Boone dealt with in the woods was a Malantroy presence that was trying to get him to the point of being a Malantroy, which is a thing that you become in this world that I've created of being able to that you become a monster that you can't really control, but you're kind of giving up your soul for it.
Now, is that a term that you coined, or is that something that you're using from some historical reference?
At this point, because in part three, and we'll discuss that next time, it goes into a little bit of a history thing of maybe how this happened. But as far as where we're at right now, it is basically something I just made up in the sense of I wanted to create. Actually, part two was created before part one or three.
Really?
I built these two parts, one and three, around part two. Part
Okay.
two was the story, and the other parts were getting us there and getting us away from it. And developing the story was like, okay, I like the idea of brothers time, time travel, that kind of thing like that. But as far as the Malantroy, it is something that comes from a bunch of different things in the sense of monsters being possessed, things like that.
Sure.
But I wanted to in this second section, I wanted to make sure to explain how this character had such a crap life,
Yes.
kept trying, gave
Yeah.
up, and then got to the point to where he was just like, I got nothing, take my soul.
You did a good job of going through that. The guy started off on a bad note with his
Hmm.
mother leaving him.
Right,
And
right.
then, he thinks he's starting to get somewhere on this ranch. And
Hmm.
then the owner of the ranch passes, and the family is
Hmm.
like, yeah, we're done. Get out.
Right.
And you're
Yeah.
heartbroken over his circumstances. He keeps trying to do something right and
Hmm.
starts to go that way a little bit. And then something just takes his legs out from under him.
Yeah. And I think we've all kind of dealt with that, maybe not to the level that he has, but I just kind
Sure.
of feel like it's a real thing and you have to keep getting over it, even though and most of us do, but even though in the back of your mind you're trying to think, I just want to give it all up and just lash out.
Right.
And that's not reality, but in this story it is. And it is something that he made a decision on. And then, like you're explaining, it's a moving off the regular story, but it does bring it back at the end when he's heading towards where the ending of the first part started.
Right. So at the end of your story, he goes through this transformation and suddenly realizes maybe, I'm not sure if this is a completely logical thing that's going
Hmm.
on with him, or is it just at this point pure animal instinct and primal urges here, but there's some sense of wanting to strike back against everything that's gone wrong for him. Is that
Right. And I think I think it, and again, didn't want to make a 10-hour story. So keeping it condensed, trying to throw hints that he's dealing with this type of thing. He's realizing that things are happening when he's not coherent, when he's not awake, and then it gets worse. It goes from animals to people, and he
yeah,
has this feeling, and it happened since that him and that Melantroy presence had something together, and then now he's going to actually I mentioned get help from the town. However, he really can't because I don't think he has a lot of control, as I explained in what's going on with him.
he's kind of got that Jekyll Hyde thing going
Yeah,
where
Yeah.
You still got the human part,
Mhm.
but then you got the animal part that's
Correct.
sending them down a different path.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, and I think that just to end this off here, I think that what I liked about is I like origin stories. I like to see how people got to certain places. And I think another thing too that made me think realistically of it is like sometimes it's not always a happy ending, and that's the part I wanted to go through with this.
right. Okay. Well, so that wraps up Brothers Time Part 2.
Correct.
And so we'll end it there, and we'll send us into a preview for next week's episode. So for the Shade Chronicles podcast, I'm Lawrence Trokey,
I'm Derek Leftridge.
and we appreciate you listening. Have a good week.
Next time on The Shade Chronicles.
Kale wipes his tears away, looks at his brother, and replies, I still can't believe this is real, but I'm glad you're here. The boys hug, and then, as they come apart, Kale asks, How did you get here? Colt explains, I've been coming here for a while now. I followed this thing here the first time you sensed it in the house, and I've been coming here every few days to understand what it is and what can be done to stop it. Colt answers, Well, we need to get the presence into the dumbwaiter and then distract the Malantroy and kill it. Simple. Kale stares at Colt with fearful eyes. Colt says, I will protect you. We can kill this thing together. As Kale slowly gets out of the dumbwaiter and gets into the hallway, he looks towards his bedroom door and does notice something. It is his brother Colt lying on the floor, not moving, and looks to be breathing very shallowly. The monster lifts its head with a snarl and soul-killing growl and says,
I'm never going to be what I was before, and neither will you.
It was Halloween just before dark, and the streetlights were coming on in the sleepy suburban town of Eureka. The older kids noticed him first. A man in a coat and a hood standing beneath a single street lamp, his face and most of his form in shadow. It made them stop in their tracks and grab hold of the younger members of their group, who protested at impeding their efforts to get more candy. The kids waited until the parents pushing strollers and walking dogs caught up to them. The dark man did not move from his position under the street lamp. Joey, what's wrong? Why did you stop? Joey's mother said, and then caught sight of the dark man. You know, it's a shame what this night has become. It used to be so magnificent and powerful. Now it's just a mockery of what it used to be, the dark man said from his seat in the back. Well, that's too bad, the male officer responded while navigating the police cruiser onto the main road. The world has been pacified, taken over by lambs, while the wolves have been banished for being too powerful, too aggressive, too bloodthirsty. Okay, just settle down back there, the female officer instructed. She was still really on edge, and his comments weren't helping her feel any better. And you, the peacekeepers, separating the lambs from the wolves. You're just lambs yourselves, pretending to be something more. You don't have the hunter's instinct, the bloodlust to do what real hunters desire to do. As he said this, he leaned forward and brought his hands over the seat. The handcuffs dangled loosely from his left wrist. Thanks again for listening to the Shade Chronicles. For comments or inquiries, you can contact us at shadechron@gmail.com. That's SHADECHRON@gmail.com. Visit us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also get more information at theshadechronicles.com. The Shade Chronicles podcast is the creative property of Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey. Stories in this podcast were the sole creation of Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey, respectively. Any attempt to replay for broadcast or distribution portions of any episode of the Shade Chronicles without the prior written consent from the creators and or significant compensation is strictly prohibited. Shame on you for even thinking about it in the first place. Thanks again for listening. Tune in next time for another episode of the Shade Chronicles.